The Convergence mod is a total overhaul of Dark Souls 3, complete with all new bosses, weapons, areas, and so much more. So I set out to 100% everything this mod has to offer. 60 hours later, this is how I platinumed Dark Souls 3's greatest mod.
An unkindled slayer of lords,
bearer of the dark sign, let your true strength shine. What? Still here? Hand it over, that thing, your dark soul.
Now, we run into our first issue as soon as we boot up the game, because technically, mods can't have their own achievements, so I created an entire trophy set that should let me see everything this has to offer. And it all starts with picking my class, which in and of itself is a challenge, because there's over 30 new options, from a conjuration-centered blood knight to a miracle-focused priest. However, I had my eyes on the battle mage, due largely in part to the modified Dark Souls 2 Farron Knight set, which looked incredible. Aside from that though, the entire class's playstyle revolves around aromancies, which are intelligent scaling physical damage sorceries that can get incredibly powerful. I'll also take the time to note that every spell tool scales differently for certain types of magic. For instance, my staff is really good for physical damage, but weak for magic, which means I'm gonna have to be versatile and try out a lot of different things. Though, as of right now, we still have a character to finish, who I of course had to name Foreskin Frank, because, I mean, come on. However, with all that boring stuff out of the way, I was able to finish up and check out what was in store for me in the first area. Now, I wasn't expecting to see many changes in this initial area, but to my surprise, the lighting was very bright. It felt like I was staring at an exploding sun, so I turned down my monitor before my retina filed for workers' compensation. It still looked pretty decent though, and fit the theme of the area, which can't really be said for certain other mods. However, I really couldn't care less about that because I was more interested in the dude right in front of me, who was off-rip aggroing to me for no reason. So I of course just beat the crap out of him, because that's how we'd all react in a situation like this. After taking care of that, I got to take a look at my new covenant, which was named the Forest Survivors. Now, I'm sure there's some cool lore behind that, but all I'm concerned about right now is the buff that comes with it, boosting my casting speed by a whole 15 points, which I'm just gonna assume is good because I don't really have a keen eye for things like this. However, I still hadn't had a chance to try out my new spells yet, so I decided to go knock out the Ravenous Crystal Lizard for 2 free Titanite scales. Though that's when I came to the realization that the magic we spawn in with really isn't that great for attacking one single enemy. However, one of them makes me auto run without consuming any stamina, which is a pretty good utility, but in the end I just whipped out my axe and smacked around the rock hard reptile until it died, because I'm not about to cook up some diabolical strategy to kill him with this thing. Now, luckily for us, the bonfire wasn't moved, and I found my boy Oscar resting on a tree nearby, so I quickly grabbed the Ashen Estus off his corpse, though we won't really need it because we already have passive FP regen. I really wasn't feeling too stimulated by this area anymore though, so I decided to head on down to the boss that I thought would be good old Gundyr, but to my surprise I got jump scared by Walmart Watchdog of the Old Lords. Luckily, he hit like a wet noodle and had less HP than a mosquito, which I was hoping boded well for the rest of the mod. Now, either way, this was our first achievement, and even better, he unlocked the boss resurrection system, which lets you force any boss you want to have that Edge of Tomorrow treatment, and I'm gonna say it right now, to complete this run I had to absolutely abuse this system. However, we're done with Untended Graves for right now, and besides, I want to see what the overhauled Firelink Shrine has to offer. Now, luckily for me, if I didn't like the covenant I was sworn into at the start, I could just easily join a different one right here. So I just ran to each one and grabbed the corresponding item, and some of them definitely caught my eye, like the Masters of HIV and whatever one the dudes from Dark Souls 1 created. However, in the end, I decided to stay with my trusty physical sorceries, mainly because my stats are already aggressively allocated into strength and int. Though I'm gonna need to buy out all the shop vendors at some point for this, so I will be swapping between covenants throughout this playthrough, because we'll be here for a while if I don't. This wasn't the end of Firelink Shrine though, because this time the whole upstairs was open to me right at the start, and this training dummy absolutely got it from me because I wanted to see if I could kill him or not. I couldn't. Other than that, I did find the Firekeeper mask, which was pretty cool, and I even took out the Swordmaster just because. Now, sadly, I can't keep exploring around here all day because I actually want to complete this run by the time I turn 41, so it was time for my first real challenge, Lothric Castle. Now, from the start, my first goal was to slaughter every enemy here because I'm going to need as many Covenant items as possible. Plus, this will let me find new items, like Laggard's Ring, which makes you do more damage the more weight you carry. Though, sadly for us, our boy is 2 malnourished, so this doesn't do much for us. However, we can still explore around, and while doing so, I came across a new bonfire on the Piss of Man roof, which was actually a great addition. Weirdly enough, though, everything up until that point wasn't really changed, so I just continued to make my way down, where I came across a little tree that told me, "From ash to abyss, your devotion leads you on." on to Iced Heresy. Now, I don't really know what that means. I haven't graduated high school yet. The main thing I was interested in was this item, a Divine Fragment. Now, there's 6 of these bad boys hidden around the world that are used to craft a very busted weapon. Sadly though, we're still a long ways away from getting that, but since I was itching to try something new, I warped back to Firelink to grab the Gust and Forest and Wind sorceries, both of which should scale really nicely with our staff. So with my new spells in hand, I traveled back and finished up running to Vort, where I found another nice little bonfire nestled outside the boss door, which is the most Elden Ring thing I've seen all day. However, there was still some extra stuff to explore at the top, like this Black Knight who went down very quickly and gave me his glaive, which is pretty sick, and of course good old Emma who gave me 3 healing potions instead of the banner. Dementia's a beast, man. Dementia's a beast. Luckily for us though, I had combed through a pretty good chunk of the area at this point, and I was ready to fight a boss anyway, so on to Vort we went. Now, off rip we were chunking him with our axe pretty well, but in phase 2, while he was dashing, these random ice spears kept thrusting into me with maximum efficiency, roll catching me into oblivion. This part was really starting to piss me off though, because I would be cruising through the fight up until he started doing this move, then I'd just get one-shotted, which sucked because dodging it has got to be one of the hardest things a human being has ever done. Eventually though, I figured out if you just roll to the side you can avoid it entirely, which kinda trivialized the entire fight. At that moment, I noticed these crystals dotted around as well. They didn't really do much, but they still look cool. With that figured out, I ran up to the bonfire at the edge of the bridge, which I guess is their replacement for everyone's favorite little goblins, though I wasn't too happy about that because I love getting touched by them. But I can't dwell on that past fun because right now we've got the entire Undead Settlement ahead of us, and I can already tell it's gonna be sick. Before I got my greasy hands on this place, I decided to upgrade my axe and staff because I had a feeling this area was gonna whoop me harder than a kid who didn't get a beer for his dad. Weirdly enough, there was this weird green wolf thing that disappeared when I got too close, but I didn't really think much about it because the dude who shoots white beams at the ring city decided to stop by for some sacrificing. I skipped the dialogue at first thinking it was Yoel, but looking back at the footage, I realized the guy kneeling said, "Please grant me death, undo my shackles," and he got his wish. And also bought me enough time to grab a few items like the Blood Orb Miracle and the Sage's Ring. Once I turned around, I found the source of our problem and took him out as fast as humanly possible, which cleared that section and let me move on. Not long after, I got jump scared by a dude with a saw who, for some reason, just ran straight off the edge because I guess he was just fed up. I thought it was pretty funny right up until I accidentally attacked and followed him down. After coming back, I managed to sprint past him, grab an Estus shard and an ember, then duck into a house that, to my surprise, had a bonfire waiting inside. Luckily for us, the hidden path to the left had a whole new route through the rooftops, which also let me get the Blood Oath Rapier, which we'll need for an achievement much later on, though you're not going to catch me using this pretty average sized weapon. Now, I thought that was about it for this little area. I figured it was just a small offshoot, but towards the end there was a ladder that brought me straight down to the Cathedral, which was a nice addition. However, the doorway to the sewers was already open, so I just ran in and grabbed the side sword of the Crusader real fast. Now, I could have kept going in there, but I still wanted to check out the other half of the settlement, and thankfully for us, there was a new route there too. This little bridge brings you straight from the bonfire to the place where you get pegged by arrows, though strangely enough, I came across the wolf again. Luckily though, he was right where the torch item was, so I could grab that real quick, which, looking back, was a great choice on my part because this mod gets incredibly dark in some spots. From here, I finished up looting everything in the area and ran up to the curse-rotted Great Red Door, where the wolf was just standing there again. Now, at this point, I was obviously expecting a new boss, but I had no clue he was going to be as hard as he was. Like, I was either under-leveled or just needed to come back to this area later, because this Archmage dude is wiping the floor with me like that one Mike Tyson-Jake Paul fight, and I'm not Jake Paul. So I just dipped and went back to exploring the sewers some more, and located just outside of them was my boy Battle Mage Eden, who I assisted in the murder of because I want his forest and some ardor. Fly high, brother, fly high. I continued to head deeper though, where I came across another human, Fallen Knight Zat, who wasn't really too hard for me and gave me the Valor Heart, which is pretty cool, though I'll probably never use that weapon in my life. A little deeper into the Catacombs, I found the Necromancer's Dagger and the good old Velka statue, though that was pretty much the end of that little journey, so I just turned around and hightailed it back to the Cathedral. Now, out of habit, I went up there to make peace with the giant, but it turned out there was a Storm Altar up there, which is our first Tier 2 Covenant, and to make things even better, this fits our build perfectly, because everything sold here is pure physical damage. Though, as of right now, we don't have many storm debris, so we'll have to come back later. That wasn't the only thing I noticed here though, because just to the left was another tinier stone that warped me to Archdragon Peak, which, judging by my damage, I wasn't ready for at all. However, I still pushed on through to the bonfire so I could have a warp point for later. Now, at this point, we really didn't have much else to do in this area, so I made the executive decision to go back to Farron Keep because I was curious what that hell had to offer. Luckily for us, I was able to sprint through this area like a crack addict at a pharmacy, grabbing a few items along the way. Unfortunately, my Estus was running low, so I had to beeline it to the bonfire, which thankfully was still there. This time there was a Dark Souls 2 giant though, which turned out to be another Covenant. It was a strength-based one, which wasn't anything I was too concerned about because our current stats make us look like we're allergic to lifting weights. So I left this behind for now and skedaddled through the swamp where I came across the Abyss Watcher's bonfire. The gate was closed. But there was still the Covenant Wolf on our side, who is basically just the Dex counterpart of the giant one, which we'll need for a trophy later, so I'll keep that in mind. At this point we have two options. We can either push down into the actual poison area or head up to Crystal Sage, and while I felt like I should make my way to the actual Farron Keep, I ended up trusting my instincts and headed down to the Sage because I didn't want to end up in a situation where I was too underleveled. Along the way I picked up the Jade Sword and an Estus Shard before finding my way over to another bonfire, which was in a place that actually made a lot more sense than whatever Miyazaki was cooking in the base game. After continuing up, I got jumped by Apprentice Tricky, who is about as tricky as a cardboard box, but he dropped the magic stone plate ring, which was pretty good. He was just a minor inconvenience though, because after him I was able to finish up the run to the Crystal Sage, who wasn't really too bad up until this point. This was kind of a wake-up call that I needed more vigor, though I decided to just tough it out and finish him up, which meant I could finally move on to the Cathedral of the Deep. Now, I'm not normally a huge fan of this area. I usually find it to be the worst part of replaying the game. However, from what I'd seen, it looked like it's been pretty heavily overhauled, so I'm kinda curious to see what I'm gonna come across. Luckily, it didn't take too long to find something new. Nothing too crazy, just some ridiculously dark lighting that I had to stumble through to reach the church, but to my dismay, the bonfire had been completely removed. In its place was one of those spider enemies, who did drop a new ring. Without the bonfire though, I wasn't sure what to do. The spider thing had already put a dent in our Estus supplies, but as Socrates once said, you gotta keep on keeping on, so I did just that and continued looping up and around. Before heading inside, I decided to check out the river area at the bottom. There wasn't too much, but I did manage to take out a giant and grab the Verdant Tome, which unlocks some new spells for us. With that out of the way, I continued up to a brand new bonfire where my boy Archdeacon McDonald was just chilling nearby with a new covenant, which you already know we'll need for a trophy. As I was heading out, an NPC near the bottom died and dropped the Apostate set. Kinda random, but I'll take it. I continued running the usual route. The bonfire was new, but the shortcuts were still blocked, meaning I had to take the long way around. I didn't really mind, it had some new enemies and surprises to keep me entertained. Along the route, I also found the Threaded Cane Sword, which was pretty cool, and eventually made my way to the underbelly of the Cathedral. There I came across a new altar, guarded by another spider guy. Thankfully, he went down pretty easily, letting me access the Lloyd's Devout Covenant. There was some cool stuff available, but the Ring of Devotion stood out to me the most, mainly because of the HP regeneration. I picked it up and rested at the new bonfire, which was a nice touch. Before we head to the Deacons, I want to check out the door at the back of the Cathedral. Since I'd recently picked up the Storm of Sword sorcery from my Covenant altar, I figured it was a good time to try it out. To my surprise, a mini-boss Evangelist was waiting there. She wasn't too hard to kill, but took forever to take down because of her massive health pool, which felt way more like a Claire Obscure side boss than anything else. Still, I took her down, which popped our second achievement for defeating a greater foe. She also dropped a soul of a greater foe, which can be used to craft some pretty powerful rings. With that done, it was finally time to fight the Deacons. On the way though, I noticed a weird portal, and I decided not to mess with it yet and just focus on the boss in front of me, who went down with zero effort. Thank God they didn't make this fight any harder. Killing them opened up another portal to Irithyll of the Boreal Valley, which was a little bit confusing. Still curious, I went back to check out the other portal, which led to Untended Graves. I got absolutely rocked by everything there, but still managed to pick up a few items, a bonfire, and beat another greater foe by cheesing him into jumping off a cliff, which I will absolutely take. I definitely wasn't ready for that area yet, and besides, I still wanted to take care of the Abyss Watchers, so I packed it up and hoofed it on back to the Farron Keep. However, on my way back to the bonfire, I noticed a new statue, which you'll never guess was another covenant, filled with more items that I'd have to farm for later in this video. I'm not going to worry about that for right now though, because there's more pressing matter right in front of us, this god-forsaken swamp. Now, I'm exaggerating here, but it still sucks. Aside from a few items and lighting 2 torches, there really wasn't much else to do here, or so I thought. As I was looking around, I happened to come across this random path leading up to the top, which took me by surprise, but was still a really nice touch. As I continued on up though, I sadly got jumped by these cursed lizards and got completely annihilated. On round 2, I was definitely edging it, but thankfully I made it to the Stray Demon. He still really wasn't that hard though, and let me grab his soul, which does allow us to unlock some new stuff. I also missed a Covenant altar that we'll have to come back for later. However, we still hadn't found the 3rd torch, which a few minutes later, I figured out why. See, this new boss, the Royal Dick Wraith, turned out to be very annoying. Luckily for us though, I had picked up the Poison Bite Ring, which in this mod makes you completely immune to, you guessed it, poison. Now, this helped out a lot, but I won't remedy the skill issue I was dealing with, so I just toughened up until I learned the moves, which paired with his very telegraphed attacks wasn't too hard. Killing him gave us our next trophy and the final torch, which is great. Before I make my way up to the Abyss Watchers though, I want to use my Soul of a Greater Foe to add a few more special rings to my collection, and it was at that moment I realized there was a metric ton of these, which doesn't bode well for our endgame cleanup. However, it was time to try my hand at the old cultists, which to anyone that watched my Cinders video will know how much I struggled with these guys, and there was no difference here. Now, I tried so many different strategies over the course of an hour and a half, but the final winning run basically just involved me popping the new dog summon at the start of phase 2 and just whipping the guy into shape. Now, weirdly enough, I noticed that the entrance to the catacombs wasn't entrancing. However, that's when I remembered a door I had seen back in Undead Settlement, so I happily pranced back over to it, and just as I suspected, this led me into the catacombs, which was incredibly dark. I don't know if this is what it's like in vanilla, but I swear to God it wasn't this bad. However, I had my handy torch, so it was kind of whatever. To start though, I of course scoured for new items, and I was actually able to grab the Gravelord Talisman, which, while I'll never use it, is still pretty cool. A little ways down the Yellow Brick Road, I came across Appa the Soul Reaper, who didn't really live up to his name. Now, I was definitely beginning to flounder in the dark here. Out of all Dark Souls 3 areas, I definitely remember this one the least. However, I'm almost sure there was a bonfire here, but to my dismay, there was nothing but an Estus shard and a mini-boss, which I thankfully was able to take down without too much trouble. At this point though, we were basically making a mad dash to Wolnir because our Estus supply was dwindling to say the least. Now, I truly wasn't expecting anything, but to my utter shock, there was a completely overhauled Nito, who I'm sure had a moveset of some random dog from Demon Souls, but honestly I couldn't care less. This fight was insanely fun, and while it was definitely easier than the Dark Wraith, I still thought it was a huge step up from the big pointless skeleton. Now, aside from his big light AoE, I was able to dodge the majority of his combos and spells, and he definitely left himself very open after these, so despite my piddly Estus amount, I was miraculously able to first try him and net myself another trophy, which was pretty sick. With his souls, I was able to put a few more points into Int to finally let me wield the ultimate spell for our class, at least from our altar, Stormfront. This bad boy just completely wipes everything around you, while also dealing pretty insane 2-hit damage, and believe me, I knew exactly who I was going to try this on first. Remember the Archdruid guy from before? Well, I was ready for revenge, and we may have been a little too overpowered, which I'm not complaining about. His kick combos are genuinely the most aggravating thing in the world, so I proceeded to obliterate this guy to grab another trophy pretty easily. With that little maggot in the back of my brain finished up though, I could finally move on further down the spiral to the Smouldering Depths. Now, I pretty quickly found a fire stray demon who I wasn't prepared for at all, but luckily our trusty Stormfront was, and he let me cheese this guy without any hassle, though we're not done yet, because we still have a Mimic who wasn't difficult in the slightest. He did drop a Murky Longstaff, which will be good when I try experimenting with dark sorceries later on. After a little more running, I wound up finding a bonfire on this little ledge, which was pretty cool. However, the swamp was not. I saw tons of little items, and thankfully the worm was gone, which I thought would be good and all, but it just meant I had to run through a lot of emptiness to pick up a few items, though this little NPC boss was still pretty fun. However, as I was running around, I came across a pretty cool new mechanic. See, there's these 3 towers that, when destroyed, open the door to the old Demon King. Now, the first and second weren't too bad, but for the third, I had to remember my way through the Catacombs, which wasn't fun. Like, at all. I did come across this really fun Flame Black Knight, though, who is a greater foe, so I'll take that. Other than that, I did the item pickup routine while floundering through here for a while until it eventually spit me out at the top, which let me breathe a huge sigh of relief. My boy Tezorig relocated up here too, which is good for him. It sucks down there. With that, I was able to grab the final tower and also the location of another teleporter, which brought us straight to Irithyll Dungeon. How fun. At this point though, I was ready for a boss fight, and since I already have old Demon King unlocked, I figured I'd hit R1 a few times and wipe the floor with him. Saying we were over-leveled would have been an understatement. That's okay though, because it just means we can go up to the brighter, more fun areas, the first of which being Irithyll, which had a really cool frost dragon added, who was tearing up the floor, though I sorta just scooted past him, which worked pretty well. Now, I don't know if it's just me, but this doesn't look familiar to me. Like, at all. Maybe it's the angle we're approaching this from, but it feels completely different. These rooftop segments were so much fun though. You basically got to explore around and find tons of items and even a greater foe, which turned out to be a really fun fight as well. Continuing around, I unlocked a shortcut to the main area, which I hadn't fully explored yet, so I grabbed a few more goodies before continuing around to unlock the Pontiff shortcut, and honestly, these new routes were so much fun. It felt like I was playing a completely different game. To top it all off, I even found my second Divine Fragment, which I still think is such a cool new mechanic. However, there's no time to dwell on that, because we have a boss fight, or so I thought, because there's nothing here, just 2 Black Flame Knights. Now, I definitely was a little confused, but I figured it was whatever, so I kept moving to the next area, where I absolutely slaughtered everything in front of me. Though the cool little offshoot area at the bottom was just completely blocked off, which kinda sucks. However, back by the Archdeacons, I came across a painting that looked an awful lot like Corvian Settlement, and the text on the screen a few moments later kinda confirmed that. Now, we are absolutely gonna get smoked here, but I figured I'd run through and grab a bonfire so I can just work back later. Anyways, you already know what we had to do in the rest of that area, but after that, I got to move on over to Gwendolyn's tomb, which was relatively unchanged. However, an elite Silver Knight was down there, who was definitely the hardest greater foe I fought yet. However, I was still able to beat him first try and grab the soul, which is pretty nice, making that our 4th one, I think. Now, we've been looking around here long enough, and it's high time we take on the Frozen Wyvern, because I have a feeling he'll be pretty hard. Now, I kinda just assumed this was a mini-boss, but to my surprise, he gave me a soul, which might actually be a curse in disguise. See, there's 2 items that can be transposed from his soul, but he's the only boss in the game who can't be respawned, which, for those of you who can't put 2 and 2 together, basically means we'll be confirmed doing a partial second playthrough, which shouldn't be a huge issue, but still kinda sucks. He did give us a trophy though, so I'm not gonna dwell on that for right now, because I still had to try and unlock the Unorlando shortcut, which wasn't really hard. Plus, I only really need it for the off chance that I die to Aldrich, which, judging by our current build, shouldn't be too hard. Now, other than the new lighting, which looked pretty cool, there wasn't much else added in this fight, so just as I predicted, we beat him first try. The real boss here was Holy Priest Squilla. I'll let you take a guess on who that's named after. This NPC kept canceling me out of my AoE and was overall a real nuisance, though I still beat him second try, so I'm kinda just building up stakes to keep some engagement here. Luckily for me though, beating this little guy lets me pay a visit to the worst Dark Souls 3 area, Irithyll Dungeon. However, the teleporter put us out by the marsh area, which I of course had to explore around. Plus, it let me find some alternate routes into regular Irithyll, including this little path with a merchant who must be living in America because the price of these items was through the roof. A little ways past him was a teleporter straight to the top of the Dark Moon Covenant Tower, which you'll never guess had the Dark Moon Covenant. Now, these sorceries are pretty interesting because, similar to ours, they solely require int, which means they work pretty well if paired with my build. Though we don't really have any proof of concords right now, and believe me, I'm not farming for those anytime soon, so I decided to, for real this time, go to Irithyll Dungeon, which, just as I suspected, was absolute hell. I spent a good 25 minutes running around looking for new items, but just about everything was locked behind a cell, so none of those are really an option for us right now. So I continued on to the Profaned Capital, of course picking up items and killing NPCs as I went, though to my dismay, the bonfire was completely deleted. Plus, the ladder was also gone, so I had to take a huge detour, which is made even worse by the fact that I never did Sigward's quest. So, with a heavy heart, I circled around the original bonfire area where a new bridge was added that led to the maze. Oh my god, the maze. This was incredibly hard to navigate, and after approximately 15 seconds of getting stuck, I decided to boot up the wiki and follow their guide, which even then was still almost impossible due to how thin and varied the corridors were. After a little trial and error, I got there though, and the reward was very much worth it. A bonfire very close to Yorm, our next trophy, and a great enemy gargoyle who, while being tankier than your average Elden Ring boss, still didn't pose too much of a threat. From there I finished up all the other paths to make sure I wasn't missing anything, which while doing this I actually stumbled across my next fragment and entered Yorm's arena. Now, out of habit, I ran to grab the Storm Ruler, but I got jump scared by Storm Debris, which is when I started to feel a hollow feeling in my chest. I already had to kill Yorm once without that weapon, and it was incredibly difficult, so I knew I had to optimize my build or I'd be stuck here all day. Now, our biggest issue here is how fast we're losing FP, so my first step was to equip a ring that fixes that. The rest was just damage boosting stuff. Now, our Tempest Lance was definitely chunking him really well. However, it also takes ages for our FP to regen, and we're gonna need all the healing flasks we can, because this is basically just an endurance fight at this point. Now, towards the end I got a stagger off and thought I could finish him off with a cool move. Sadly, he still had a sliver of health left, which sucks, but I was still able to finish him up, and it was at that moment I realized that they left a message that tells you to use the Storm Ruler, which is just cruel. Weirdly enough, I wasn't teleported to Dancer though, so I of course had to warp back to beat up an old lady, because that's just how we do it over here on Old Boy C. However, I wasn't expecting her to come back in red phantom form and actually pose a threat to me, and while it was a very minor one, it was still cool to see. Dancer on the other hand was still incredibly easy. I just sat back and did some more AoEs because why not? She's just a gateway boss at this point though, because she's basically just blocking you from the choice of Osiris or the Twin Princes. Now, if you've ever watched me play DS3 before, you probably already know where this is going. The world's greatest dad couldn't wait any longer. Now, this may be a controversial take, but I actually enjoyed the area leading up to him, and with a few convergence goodies dotted around, it made it even better. However, aside from a new bonfire, there really wasn't a ton else added to the map, so I lit it real quick and headed in, where to my dismay, they replaced my boy with Gunder. Now, I was cruising through first phase like an alcoholic in a school zone, but every single time I got to phase 2, I got annihilated in like 3 seconds, which was kind of a problem. I thought I had his moves down pat, but I had to resort to sit back and spam R1 method, which isn't something I ever thought I would succumb to, but we all have our low points, I guess. I figured I'd run past him and grab whatever items were there, but to my horror, I saw the reincarnation of Giant Dad walking right towards me, though he definitely had the IQ of your average Giant Dad user, because this wasn't a hard fight, even with my very low Estus supply, so I'll take that. Other than that, I grabbed a cool item and a Titanite slab, which is kind of pointless with the new upgrade system, but whatever. Speaking of new upgrade systems, while you weren't looking, I had inconspicuously picked up the Azure Spear, which kind of works with our start build, and besides, I wanted to try out some new weapons. Now, this thing has some alright damage output, but the weapon art is what made it cool, allowing me to shoot flames from my tip, though it still wasn't good enough for this fat knight, who I'm just gonna skip because I'm not dealing with that. After knocking out a few more guys, I came across Vanguard Renoa, who wanted to have a stare down with me because she did nothing but sit there with her shield up, which is fine for me. My attacks come in from behind anyway. Now, the biggest change here was the lack of dragons. Like, they're just completely gone, which is fine on my end, but it still felt kinda weird. Also, since I have to explore everything, it really doesn't make too much of a difference. Fast forward past the collecting I did here, I came across a Prime Boreal Outrider Knight, which I thought was gonna be a tough challenge, but at this point, I need to become self-aware and realize just how broken my spell set is. I was scared to get up close and personal though, so I just cheesed him the old-fashioned way, getting him stuck in an endless loop of walking back and forth. Though I did the final hit with my spear, so I still got in there and got my punches in. Anyways, I just proceeded through the rest of the area and grabbed as many items as I could. Kind of uneventful, but we have to do it or else we'll have a lot of backtracking to do. Now, I went and grabbed a bonfire that I'm like 70% sure wasn't there before and went up to fight one of my favorite bosses, Dragon Slayer Armor. Or so I thought, because this mod really wants to make sure I don't get what I want. This time we got an entirely new boss, which I shouldn't really be complaining about because this guy was actually an insanely cool and insanely hard fight. A little too hard. After attempt 10, I was starting to realize this guy wasn't as easy to cheese. Plus, my spear was having a really hard time holding up, so I was kinda stuck. Aside from Untended Graves, there was really nowhere else to go, and while I highly doubted I'd be able to take on that area at this level, I figured it was worth a shot because I was getting nowhere with this guy. Literally every build I was trying wasn't doing anything, even this weird tornado thing, which looks kinda funny, but that's besides the point. Now, over in the old graves, I had already explored pretty much everything, so I decided to go challenge old champion Gunder, though once again I was thrown for a loop, which is like the third time in the last 5 minutes. Because old Demon King was back, and this time he was purple with some new projectiles, which I thought was cool, but overall wasn't really a hard fight. So I was starting to think I was pretty good at this game. Then this appeared, and I realized I was kinda cooked. See, our friend Lillian had the same moveset as Sister Fried, which was fairly obvious, but her effects looked much cooler, and she had some weird projectile attacks that were very difficult to dodge. However, I'd absolutely take those over her melee attacks in a heartbeat, so I did just that. I sat back and spammed my spells while dodging her tracking projectiles and the occasional jump attack, which, while it was slow work, did allow me to get the job done first try, which is definitely going on my grave because I haven't accomplished much else in my life. Now, when I say this fight took an eternity to finish, I really mean it took like 5 minutes, but it felt like a long time. However, it was worth it because we got our next trophy and her boss soul, which is pretty sick. Also, these weird NPCs were just sitting on the side forever nodding in thought, and I couldn't really figure out why, but since there was literally no way up to them, I just went to Dark Firelink Shrine, where I found my boy Seki the Shadow, who was kind of bugging out, though I'll take that because old Lillian never spawned in a bonfire for me after I killed her, so I was carrying a decent amount of souls with no Estus. Before I headed back to the pressing matter at hand though, I wanted to see if there was anything else added around here, and just as I thought, a purple black knight was there, who I was doing okay on until I accidentally fell off a roof. Now this isn't so bad because I got to just spam him while he was at the edge of the roof. I accidentally staggered him though, which kinda threw a wrench in my plan, because that's when all hell broke loose on his AI. See, he was basically completely broken, and since I couldn't remember where to fall again, I had to try and lure him off the end, which was a very hard task for some reason, because this wall was the most enticing thing he's ever seen. However, he randomly stopped and started creeping towards me, which is when he decided to gain all his functionality back, so that was definitely a problem. My tornadoes were able to subdue him pretty well though, so I started comboing those with my AoE, and we were rolling. That is, until we got into Firelink, because things got even buggier here, and I nearly died more times than I'd like to count, but basically we just kinda broke his AI, and I thought it was funny. Sorry for the long-winded explanation. Anyways, we still have an actual boss I need to worry about, because that little detour didn't help much. I still had random things like this happening. Now, at this point, I came to the terrible realization that I actually have to try if I want to make any headway here, so I was back at square one. My spells clearly weren't working too well, and my axe was doing less than nothing, so I decided to have a look around at the wiki and see if any other spell classes had something that would work here. And that's when I noticed Umbral Edge, which is apparently given to us by Archdeacon McDonald, which, luckily enough, we had plenty of human jegs to afford the spell, plus enough upgrade materials to get a pretty good staff for it as well. Now, after all this, I was finally able to return. As far as I could tell, the old edge was much more effective than anything we've tried before, and although it definitely ate through our FP, the quick damage was well worth it, and finally, on my first attempt with this spell, I was able to take down the Beheaded Knight once and for all, and put this low point in my life behind me, while also popping our next trophy. Now, I could go up and do Archdragon Peak just to check off that area, but I mean, the Grand Archives are right in front of us, so I figured I'd just knock that out and grab as many items as I could along the way, so we won't have to backtrack later on. Now, progression here here really was very unchanged. Archmage Philippus got stuck in a wall, but I still got his stuff, so it was whatever. The 3 goons were also moved down, and while I almost had them, I had to call it quits because I was all out of Estus and my health was dwindling a little too low for comfort. So as a safety measure, I went and made sure I had the elevator unlocked before returning to finish them off. Now, I didn't get anything besides a shield, but I still feel like I completed something. Plus, they were guarding an ebony titanite shard, which is something. Other than that, though, there wasn't much else to note in this area, so I just made my way up to the twin princes, who turned out to be way easier than I thought they would be, especially after that headless knight fight. On my first attempt, I took them down, which I'm pretty proud of myself for. After that, though, I called it quits for the day and went to sleep because it was getting late. However, I booted up the game a day later to find this. I guess I quit out too early, even though I'm sure I didn't. It was kind of whatever though, because I just went back and finished them off again. With that though, I can technically place almost all the Lords of Cinder down. However, we're still missing one, and a mysterious purple rift opened up in Firelink, which was kinda ominous. But I wanted to see what was in it, so I checked it out, and to my surprise, it was literally just dark in Orlando. Now, I couldn't really go anywhere besides the boss room, so that was kind of unfortunate, but I figured I'd just go check it out anyway, and my boy had some voice lines now. I don't know if those were cut from the game or added by the team, but either way, they sounded incredible. However, I was still severely underleveled for this boss, and since I wasn't in the mood to put up with this for another hour and a half, I decided to go back to Archdragon Peak and finish up what I had started at the beginning of this video. Now, the lighting here was completely changed, and honestly, I think it's for the better, because, I mean, come on. However, aside from that, I wasn't really noticing a ton else, so I went up to the Ancient Wyvern, who turned out to actually be Dragon Slayer armor, which I wasn't really expecting, but actually made a lot more sense when you think about it for 5 seconds. Now, aside from that, there may have been some new moves, like I don't remember getting jumped by this face before, but I also normally kill this guy in like a minute, so maybe I just never saw it. Anyways, it was a very cinematic but not very hard fight, so I just kind of went through the rest of the area, making sure to kill Aeromancer Susie along the way, just because I felt like exercising my free will. However, this area isn't really huge, and I can't avoid the elephant in the room any longer, so on to Nameless King I went, and oh boy, he was just as hard as I remembered. He wasn't really nameless anymore though, which was kind of cool. However, it was still just the same boss in the end, and while the fight itself was uneventful, we both traded a killing blow, which I was really nervous about at first. However, once the soul popped up on my screen, I knew I was okay. After a quick load, I was given the cutscene and teleported down to the bottom, which was kinda odd, but I'll take it. Now, while I was down there, I noticed our 4th shard, so I gladly grabbed that and returned to the bonfire because this guy was pissing me off. Now, that's pretty much the end of base game. Besides Pontiff and Soul of Cinder, I've pretty much done everything here, so I really had no choice but to go to Ashes of Ariandel, which I was actually pretty excited for. Normally, it's pretty annoying to navigate, but I'm hoping they're gonna change some things. Luckily though, we had already grabbed the bonfire there, so I just warped and immediately went insane picking up everything I could. And while there was a few good items, it was overall kinda lackluster, so I made my way up to the little chapel with Sir Vilheim, who had some flashy new stuff, but still couldn't take getting whacked by my big black sword. Now at this point we have access to the rest of the snowfield, so I just started wandering around aimlessly because I literally have no clue where I'm going here. I eventually came across the bug room though, which was a good sign because that's where I can actually open the door to Sister Freed and Daddy Ariandel, though not before knocking out Giggle, Plate of Rosaria. Yep, I didn't mispronounce that. However, we're not ready for the final fight here yet because we still have to go down to the depths of hell, or at least the bottom of this valley, because there's actually a newish boss down here. Champion's Master of the Depths and his dog, who looked pretty cool but also really weren't that hard, so I killed him and warped back up because being down there isn't that fun. We did get a trophy though, so that's something. I prefer to get tortured by a lady with 3 phases though, so I just started in on that. Now, first phase was about as simple as it gets. Stormfront just completely annihilated her and allowed a nice transition to phase 2, where I came to the realization that they share a health bar, so if I hit both with my AoE, it'll basically do double damage, which I felt pretty smart for figuring out. Now, this strategy worked very well, and let me get to phase 3, where I kinda just did the same thing. I'm sorry, okay? It works. Now, you can count it as cheating, but I did in fact beat her first try, so I'll take that. However, this thankfully means we can move on to the peak that is Ringed City. Now, off-rip, there was a lot of new items located here, so I speedran that and headed down to the place where I get touched by beams of light, though not from the enemy I was expecting. She still went down without a hitch though, so I moved on up like I was playing Gears of War before popping a U-turn to continue up, around, and down to the Demon Princes, who you already know I had to pull the cheese strategy on. If FromSoft wants to make a terrible fight, I'm gonna abuse all the things at my disposal. Now, with them down, I could get to exploring the remaining area, and my god, explore I did. Invaders, items, and even a random Dragon Slayer armor. After getting through the swamp and up the tower, I came across Old Madir, and while I really didn't feel like knocking him down yet, I did end up sitting there just spamming spells for a while. Now, nothing's really stopping me from fighting the real Madir in the cave, so I began preparations. He was weak to lightning, so I checked the wiki for lightning miracles, and to my surprise, I had completely missed the sunlight altar, so I went down the secret path and picked up a few miracles miracles. Though we don't really have the stats for that, so I decided to just respec at knockoff Guinevere. However, I wasn't really liking the spells, so I just respec back and looked more into a melee build, and after going through the countless weapons I had picked up, I came across the Eagle of Light. We had the stats, and it dealt some very nice lightning damage, so I upgraded it to the max level before returning, ready to take him on. Now, off rip, I was incredibly surprised by the damage, because it was kind of insane, especially to the head. Leg shots were definitely a little low, but for some reason I was doing very good at dodging, which has never happened in my life. Like, ever. Now, for a minute, I wasn't able to get any hits in, which was low-key scary, but I got it together and finished him up on my first try with this weapon. Now, Half-Light is like right next to him, and since I got the hardest boss right out of the way, I figured he would be a nice little detox to me. Oh, how horribly wrong I was. Some sad sap on the Converge team thought it would be a good idea to replace my glorious king with old Euclid, which I should have seen coming because bro's been in Firelink Shrine since the start of this run. My issue with this fight wasn't the boss's moves or him being unbalanced, it was just the fact that I kinda suck. However, as Plato once said, good build crafting always fixes a skill issue, so I took his advice and decided to get to work on a magic damage build that revolved around the Moonlight Greatsword. I equipped items like the Bellowing Dragon Crest Ring and the Infiltrator set to boost my damage by as much as possible. Returning to old Euclid, I had a much easier time absolutely chunking him with my weapon art repeatedly, while all he could do was sit back and watch while giving me a trophy. Now, I felt pretty confident with this build, so I took it straight to Gale, and since we're right here, I decided to run it, and my god, that damage makes it look like he's got a second health bar. Phase 1 was a breeze, and Phase 2 was, well, Phase 2. After remembering his moves again though, I had a significantly easier time finishing him off for that big, juicy, bloody dark soul and a mysterious big tree in this forgotten building. Upon closer inspection, I noticed that it held our final fragment needed to craft our ultimate weapon. Shiro was kinda blocking my path though, so I took her out and immediately went to the forest and altar to craft our endgame weapon and grab another achievement. If you've played Sekiro, then you probably already know what this weapon is about, but even if you haven't, just hearing 700 base damage without upgrade should make that one hair sticking out of your chin twitch. After reinforcement, it jumped to over 1,000, which is just straight up busted, but hey, they left it there for a reason, so who am I to argue? We've successfully cleared literally everything we could do though, and old Pontiff can't wait much longer, and believe me, I know I've edged you guys long enough though, so without further ado... So, we're doing a little more damage than I thought we would, and it made his clone look like a small child. After knocking out the first health bar though, he popped up looking like my goat, Glock Saint Ashina. Now, I'm not gonna lie, the moves here were sick, especially certain sweeps and AoEs. However, our damage was just so insane that it just completely trivialized the entire fight. I'm not gonna complain about balancing when it benefits me though. Killing him popped us another trophy though, which is sick. Plus, he was our final Lord of Cinder, so I could trigger the cutscene where I touch a long coiled sword until it teleports me to the Land of Ash. Now, I'm not gonna lie, the kiln was looking really cool. Mainly the big piece of Castle Lothric in front of the boss gate felt a lot more epic, which is nice because I spent 40 hours working up to this point. Now, off rip, this guy was much harder than Pontiff. Bro had tons of new moves at his disposal that I wasn't ready for at all. Though I still got through Phase 1 alright. The real issue starts in Phase 2, and it wasn't the crazy new lightning and cancer projectiles. Nope, it was this one animation lock attack that completely melts your health bar. After multiple attempts of getting nowhere, I realized I'd have to figure out how to dodge it or else I was screwed, so I came up with the genius strategy of running in the opposite direction as fast as humanly possible, which worked out pretty well, letting me get that final hit and get the ending, which is all well and good, but that's not the end of our platinum journey, not by a long shot. See, the post-game stuff is where this gets interesting, because not only are there still some special bosses for us to take down, but there's also a lot of farming to get done, starting with our first covenant, Assassin's Brotherhood, which I somehow completely missed on my first playthrough, but that's fine, because it's right by the bonfire in Undead Settlement. So, after grabbing it, I started devising a route I could do to get roughly 150 covenant items for 15 different covenants. However, the solution was literally right in my face. Since you're able to respawn bosses as many times as you want, the Deacons of the Deep are by far the easiest method for this. All I had to do was pop Stormfront, sit back, and watch as it ripped through their backline. And since they infinitely respawn, I can just sit there and farm, and farm, and farm. See, I'm trying to buy every Covenant item, but that's also a lot of farming, because we basically need 2,250 total Covenant items to trade for these, like Human Dregs and Proofs of Concord kept. But, I mean, unless you want me to go into great detail on, I don't even know. Point is, this took a long time, but we got cool items, like some insane summons and weapons. But after about 10 hours, we got literally everything and picked up another trophy, which was pretty sick. I really don't know how to prove to you that I did this, but I'm being so for real. I did it in the peak of summer heat in July, and it'll probably go down as a memory of all time, pushing out all those pesky childhood experiences. Next on my checklist was the rekindled bosses, which I was completely unaware of at the start, but while doing some digging around, I found people talking about them, and it turned out the Abyss Watchers and Yorm have a prime variant that's apparently really hard, so I decided to give it a go. It didn't go well. Even my absurdly overpowered weapon was doing nothing, so I had to come up with a new cheese build, and by that I mean watching a couple YouTube videos on optimal strategies. This dark poison build I found was doing numbers on my boy, and I had to do next to nothing to get it working, so I decided to just do this because that 40,000 HP health pool was completely ridiculous. I did the same thing for Yorm, letting me grab the rekindled Farron Greatsword and Great Machete. Now for our final step, we sadly had to go back to the Collectathon because we have to get all the conjurations, miracles, and spells. Now for miracles, it wasn't too bad. I already had most of them, so it was just a matter of grabbing a couple of tomes, so I got that trophy pretty easily. The real issue is the other two categories, because I was missing a lot of tomes, and on top of that, the Soul of the Frigid Wyvern made 2 items that I had to pick between, because we can't respawn him. I ended up making the conjuration just to check that off, then finished up the sorceries as well, which marked 3 more achievements down the drain. Before we move on to New Game Plus, however, we first had to take down the Champion Elder Guru, who I somehow missed and is the only great enemy left for that trophy, so I quickly went and knocked him out for an easy Great Boss Soul and achievement. Now, the only 2 we have left are getting all unique weapons and all special rings, which are the ones we get from great enemy souls. However, we have to go into New Game Plus to get the rest of these because of the Frigid Wyvern Sword and the fact that there's 15 rings and 10 great enemies. Now, off rip in New Game Plus, I began wiping through all the locations I remember them being at, like in the woods and at the Cathedral, where I traded it in for the last couple rings. From there, it was just a power trip up to Unorlando, where I wiped the dragon and got my final trophy, also letting me get the platinum and finish up what might just be one of the greatest runs I've ever done. Now, I'm not going to dwindle on this for too long here, but I do want to address some things you might have noticed throughout the video. For one, I definitely cut off tons of parts, like farming and weapon and spell collecting, because I felt like it detracted from the video. I'm sorry to the 2 people that disappoints. Second, I'm sorry this took so long to get out. I hope you're able to understand why. I mean, 14 pages of script, roughly 40 minutes of voiceover and editing, all that takes an insane amount of time, especially with the fact that I'm back in school and don't have anyone here helping me to make these videos. I promise the uploads will be more consistent after this one drops. Anyways, I'm probably overstaying my welcome here, so as always, check out Schooled in the Classics. It's me and my dad's NES game channel. Also, a huge thank you to my channel members. It means the world to me that you guys appreciate my terrible videos enough to support me. Anyways though, I don't really have much else to say here, so bye!